What is it about domains that are so important? And when we're talking about a domain, I'm talking about like a web domain, which is, a website. A domain is kind of, if you go to google.com, right? Like, to get your brand out there, to get a Google is ultimately a domain. And you can go to companies like Squarespace or GoDaddy, and you can just go in, and if you want to buy a website and you're thinking about it, you need to get the web domain, right? And it's actually a really great thing if you're thinking about it, starting a company or a side hustle or whatever, you've got an idea. Domain squatting, domain, like sitting on domains is actually, there's a really big culture on it, and it's an interesting part of the internet. But I just purchased a couple of domains just in case, and that seems like such a silly thing to do, but just if you're thinking about it from like an IP law perspective, the sooner that your idea starts to have some type of transaction associated to it, the sooner it's actually easier for you to actually pull on that thread and be like, this is my thing. And, they don't have to be expensive. If you can get creative, luckily now, we've had a lot of changes in the regulatory side that it doesn't have to be a .com anymore. It can be a .ai, it can be a .unicorn, pretty much whatever you want. Just make sure that it's easy for people to remember, because that is something that I've often noticed, like companies forget to think about accessibility compliance requirements when they're thinking about grabbing their domain, because, the founder, the visionary, whatever, is like, oh, it has to be spelled this way. And that might make sense for how their brain works, but definitely take a minute to think about, could your grandma write it down? Could your neighbor down the street that's hard of reading or hearing or reading, whatever, hard of reading, but yes, hard of hearing, if they could think about, can they access the information? Could they, if they heard you say it, could they write it down easily? Would it translate well into other languages? If you're thinking about something more global and international, just something to think about when you have an idea. And so, I'm always I hold my cards pretty close. So I try to make sure that, I grab the domain, get the entity set up, make sure that there's some type of legal structure around it. It doesn't have to be perfect. If you've got a good idea, grab the domain and whatever it looks like, even if it's not the final one, you can always get a DBA. You can always do business as a different thing. It's actually a really inexpensive way to start having business transactions that you can also I don't know, maybe use on your taxes in some way as your first business expense. So again, I happen to be a lawyer. I'm not your lawyer. Could be. But my name is Milu. I'm the creative compliance officer, and I have a couple of small businesses to my name, and I am planning on something pretty cool. And so, if you're thinking about that and you have an idea,